next guest has been the evening news weatherman for Global Television in Toronto for 10 years. Hard to believe.
Yeah.
But in that time, he's also become one of the city's most popular on-air personalities, combining a boyish charm with obvious knowledge about the subject he's covering. And as most of us have probably noticed, climate change and bad weather has become much more a part of the news itself in recent years.
Anthony Farnell does indeed understand the weather. Born and raised in Montreal, Anthony got a U.S. college degree in meteorology, that means climate and weather patterns, and began his weather broadcast career in Montana. He can usually be found in front of a green screen in the Global studio, but he's also covered severe weather events on the scene and obviously lived to tell the story. Anthony, welcome. Delighted to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Do you know, I gotta ask, most tall, lanky kids growing up in Montreal would dream of growing up to be defensemen for the Canadians, but according to the bio on the Global website, you spent most of your early years in class looking out the window at clouds.
Yeah.
Why the interest in weather?
You know what, that's a great question, and I wish I had the answer. It was one of those things that as a very early age, 4 or 5 years old, just kind of looking out at the cloud patterns. When it snowed, I got excited, and that was something that stuck with me to the point where when I got a little older, up on rooftops, waiting for thunderstorms to roll in. I know now that's really not advised to do. But yeah, weather's always been something that's interested me, and then it just kind of went along with me as a hobby until eventually I knew, okay, maybe this is something I can make a career out of.
Right, and that's when you decided to go from high school to college in Vermont and study meteorology.
That's right, yeah, and actually it was, growing up in Montreal, there was this massive ice storm, the ice storm of the century back in 1998, and I was just about to finish high school at the time, and this was early January, and I had made a prediction. It was the first kind of prediction that I told all my friends, everybody I knew, that this was going to be a huge ice storm. Nobody else was calling for it, all the guys I watched on TV, and it happened. It ended up being 5 days of ice, about 4 inches thick, no power for 2 weeks. Told my friends, don't even bother studying for exams. It's no school.
It's all over for a while.
It's all over, and it ended up happening. So from that moment on, I was like, okay, this is more than just a hobby. I think I can make something out of this, and I figured out, okay, I need math, I need science, I need a lot of things to follow up with meteorology, and then went to Vermont for university.
So you had decided to be a broadcaster, a meteorologist, and not pursue a scientific career.
Well, it's a Bachelor of Science in Meteorology. So
Right.
I went with that, and then it was actually second year university that I said, okay, do I want to be a field meteorologist for Environment Canada up in Nunavut for a few years, or what do I want to do with this degree? And TV kind of came a calling. There's a really good TV our broadcasting program at that university at Lyndon State in Vermont. So yeah, it all fell into place, and made a resume tape, and then shopped it out.
The rest is history, and here you are in Toronto.
Yeah.
Let me ask you about your audience. Do you think that they have any idea of what you actually do when you're not on air? Do they understand the amount of knowledge you have to have and the analysis you have to apply, or do they just think you get a forecast at 5:28 and walk on the air and go, it's going to be cloudy with wind?
I honestly think that it's kind of mixed, and most of the time on a nice high pressure area that's overhead for the next 3-4 days, maybe it doesn't really matter. They just assume that, sure, you're a smiling face on TV, but when the you know what really hits the fan, and you have a big winter storm bearing down, or tornado warnings in place, you would hope that they know that you're a forecaster, that you're putting a lot of work, a lot of time, a lot of energy into making this forecast and trying to be right. So I think it is really a mix of the old school mentality where you're just a smiling face on TV, and kind of the new world where, yeah, most of us are meteorologists, not just weather specialists on air.
Right. So tell us what a day in the life of a meteorologist looks like. When you're not on air, what are you doing?
Well, there's a lot of community involvement. So we do. There's a lot of causes that are dear to me. There's a lot of schools that we visit. So that's kind of 1 or 2 of these a week. At the same time, when you get in, there's a lot of forecasting that has to go in, and we actually now are doing several markets. So it's not just the Toronto market, but Montreal, the Maritimes, and these all take time to create these forecasts. And then, of course, you got to get dolled up, looking pretty. You guys know you need some makeup, you need to fix your hair a little, just a tiny, tiny bit. And then, it's showtime. So you go on air, you're doing live broadcasts, and then a new aspect, something in the last few years, is this whole online or digital side of things, where we're trying to create these videos, these forecasts that can be on all platforms all at once.
You know, I think what many viewers don't realize or don't appreciate is that you're not working from a script. You've literally got to wing it when you're on air, unlike the anchors who are reading off a teleprompter. So you've got to be able to be succinct and clear and precise. And also, I think a lot of people still don't realize that you're actually standing next to a blank wall. That isn't a big map behind you. So you're actually looking at a monitor over there and pointing over here to Nunavut kind of thing.
And your dexterity is amazing.
Well, that's just it. It does take, obviously, some time to get used to. And when I first started out, everything wasn't wireless. There were wires coming out of everywhere, just for the cable, for the earpiece, for the clicker. And then if you ended up spinning the wrong way, you were all tangled up. So, there's a green screen behind us. It's not actually a weather map, so it's projected on afterwards. So we see ourselves on monitors on both sides, and also in front of us. So we have an idea of what we're pointing at, but we're not going to be specific and point directly to one thing. And one of the benefits that we don't have a prompter is that we can be a bit more on the fly, and you seem a bit more genuine, and you're talking to the camera, you're talking to the people at home watching, and that becomes easier when you're spending 2 hours making the boards, making the weather maps yourself, so you know what's coming next. You're not just caught off guard like that.
Right. So there are some people who probably say you have the best job in the world because nobody can really blame you if the forecast is wrong. But
you'd be surprised.
They do. Okay, well, I'm going to ask you, though, seriously, what do you think your accuracy rating is over years?
I mean, overall, we've gone from a 5-day forecast to a 7-day forecast. So when you're looking at the next day or the next 2 or 3 days, I like to think that we have the best accuracy. I have the best accuracy
so what does
in
the
Toronto.
Best accuracy look like? 50%?
Well, I mean, it always, temperature-wise, I think we're within a degree or two for 2-3 days out. As far as cloud cover goes, again, it depends on the season, but in the winter, if you're expecting a storm and you're calling for 10 centimeters and 30 falls, that's a pretty bad accuracy. So it's really the big weather events that you can judge yourself more clearly on. Nobody really notices if tomorrow's 5 degrees or 6 degrees.
If you're off by a degree or two.
But if it's rain that's expected and all of a sudden there's a big snow day for all the kids, that is a bigger deal. And I think that's something that I take pride in being more accurate than others. So,
You know, we talked about TV weathermen back in the old days when, you know, back in the 50s, well, I was going to say, you know, a guy basically had to be an announcer who could use chalk on a blackboard.
Yep.
Or in the case of Dave Duvall at CTV, he could do it backwards onto a screen that right through. But those guys weren't necessarily meteorologists. When did that transition happen that they weren't just announcer guys from radio to actually being truly a science where you have to understand weather patterns and climate and so on?
And nothing against those guys, because when you're on air talking about the weather for 30, 40, in some cases 50 years, you learn a whole lot, and you didn't have the graphics that we have now that basically do the tricks for you versus somebody dancing or chalk on a wall. So basically, I think in Canada, it's a little bit behind really the United States. My first job when I was out in Montana, it's a town of under 100,000 people, and we were 4 meteorologists on staff. One station, there were 4 stations there, each had the same. So you're talking 20 meteorologists in a small market, yet in Toronto at that same time, there was none, maybe one that had a degree. So it's been a bit behind, but I think now we're playing a bit of catch up. Some of that has to do with the fact that we're not in a huge tornado alley right here. We don't get impacted by hurricanes as much. But really, the late 90s into the early 2000s, there started to be more meteorologists and more of a focus put on on the science behind it for TV stations.
Right, right. You mentioned Percy Saltzman, and there are plenty of others we could mention. There's Dave Duvall, David Onley. Is there any particular weatherman or woman, for that matter, that you patterned yourself?
A little bit. I mean, just going to Linden State in Vermont, there's a slew of alumni that have started the Weather Channel in the United States, have gone on to work at a ton of different stations, have gone into the energy industry and are doing forecasts for hedge funds, for basically monthly seasonal forecasts around the world, and whether there's going to be frost for orange crops in Florida. So there's a large veil on this whole meteorology degree and different things. But as far as somebody I looked up to in the TV world, it would be Jim Cantori, who is some U.S. folks know him, others even in Canada.
And what was it about him?
Just his energy, his love of the weather, the fact that he's on camera and there's thunder snow, which is kind of this amazing phenomenon where you get lightning and thunder in a blizzard, basically, and just his sheer joy and excitement. And that was something that I always said, okay, I feel the same way. If I can bring that to Canadian viewers, that'd be great.
Is it just us getting older, or is the weather indeed becoming more unpredictable and often more severe than it was a generation or two ago?
Both hotter and colder.
Yeah, and if so, why?
Well, definitely we're living in warmer times. It's a warmer climate. Some of the question marks are, okay, is this 100% human caused, or is this more natural variations and then our input is a little bit less? That is a very tough question. I don't know if the answer really matters, but we're in definitely different times. A couple of years ago, that polar vortex, the cold winters we had, those were reminiscent of the 70s. So it is a bit of a mix. We have had more floods, more droughts, and some of that is definitely fact. Some of that is happening. Also, just the human conditioning. When you're looking back 20, 30, 40 years, you don't really remember it like it actually happened, and some of that is, I mean, walking barefoot to school, that type of thing.
I remember more snow.
Yeah, exactly. I'm getting to that point where I'm saying that.
Yeah, I remember more snow when I was a kid.
Yeah, and you know what? Generally, the 70s, a very, very snowy decade. It was cold and snowy in the U.S. and Canada as well. We've seen a few winters that have come close to that, but that's kind of a cyclical pattern that maybe comes back every 30, 40 years. So we're maybe heading in that direction.
Right, but I think what Jim is getting at and what we're all experiencing is the climate change phenomena. So how much of that do you of what you're explaining on a day-to-day basis in terms of the weather, do you attribute to what's happening in a more global sense?
Yeah, well, I wish we had this amount of time to chat with the viewers every single day, but we are confined to 2 to maybe 3 minutes, and generally people want to know tomorrow what to wear, whether to bring an umbrella. So we try and throw in maybe a little bit. We also have to be cautious that we don't have that much time, we don't have the extended coverage, and also just being the scientist really of the newsroom, you just have to take a middle ground stance, not to step on too many toes, and I know that's still in some cases a pretty contentious issue. So
well, not everybody wants to say the words climate change or believe in it.
Or believe in it, and to what degree, yeah.
But you know what, I don't know if it's ironic, but certainly I would think that most people, especially golfers like you and me, Anthony, are almost embarrassed to say, hey, this global warming works for me. It creates warmer summers, longer springs and falls, more golf. But are we being naive to perhaps the longer term effects of all this climate change?
Yeah, I think so. And that's a very, I mean, obviously if you're a golfer, if you're somebody who just pays for heat on an average winter, you would want warmer conditions. I know a lot of people head south for the winter because it's cold here. So if it's naturally warmer. But yeah, I think we have to look at the big picture, and we have to realize that, okay, having a November like we had this month, or at least the first half of the month, where it was sunny every single day and the temperature was about 7 degrees above seasonal, that is the fact that it's happened 2 years in a row, something that we have to at least take pause and maybe say, okay, is this
Something
spun out of
big is happening here.
is this spun out of control?
Yep.
Or are we able to reel it back in, or what's going to happen in the future? So.
Right. So you don't think the whole issue is overblown, or the fact that
No, I do think that there is some politics that may be involved on both sides, and I hate when science becomes a political issue.
Yes.
And things get spun, or a certain hurricane or a winter storm can get blamed directly on climate change. That is impossible to do, and I hate to do that, but when you look at big picture over years or decades, it's something that we should be concerned about.
Yeah.
You know, you're still a young man. You've probably got 50 years at least ahead of you in your
Oh my
life.
goodness.
It's
At
a long
least,
life
at
ahead.
least. Let's say 60, but I wonder, do you ever go to bed at night and sort of shudder to think of what the world is going to be like 50 years from now with all this rapidly changing weather that we're having?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm happy I'm in this field, because the weather is obviously something that Canadians talk about to begin with, and more so now that it's top of mind. But yeah, I am concerned. I think that there's a lot of other aspects. The sun is actually going through a very quiet phase right now. There's multi-decadal oscillations that are trending colder. So I think it's more 75 to 100 years that is the
Yeah,
big
it's
concern.
bad.
Yeah.
But we should take action now.
Right.
You know,
We can't
before
let you go.
we let you go, we've got to bring up a shot of your sidekick,
Yes.
Storm the weather dog.
Oh,
Tell us
boy.
how
Look at that
important
pup.
Storm is to your career.
Well, I'd like to say he's mildly important, but he is a figure that he gets recognized in the dog park when my wife's walking him. It's just incredible, and it's the viewers actually named him 5 years ago, and he has grown up with Toronto. So
Well, we're pleased to
Fantastic.
see him, and we're even happier to have had you
Thanks
in
for
the
having me.
city.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
Great fun.
Thanks so much, and we'll be back with more Toronto Files after this break.